The diplomatic transport shuddered violently as it tore through Earth's atmosphere. Ambassador Trell gripped his seat restraints while warning lights flooded the cabin with red urgency. His aide PRYN worked frantically at her console, trying to reroute power from the failing systems. Behind them, Security Officer Havoc braced himself against the wall, and Engineer Quinn called out damage reports that grew worse with each passing second. "Main thrusters are gone," Quinn said, her voice tight with controlled panic. Switching to emergency descent protocols. The ship lurched sideways, throwing everyone against their restraints. Through the viewport, Trell watched the ground rushing up to meet them. Dense forest stretched in every direction, a sea of green that offered no safe landing zone. This was supposed to be a routine first contact mission. The Corvian Federation had sent him to establish diplomatic relations with humanity, not to crash into their wilderness. "Brace for impact," Quinn said. The ship hit hard. Metal screamed and buckled. Systems exploded in showers of sparks. Then everything went still except for the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the crackle of small fires throughout the cabin. Trell unbuckled slowly, checking himself for injuries. Nothing broken. Around him, the others were doing the same. They had survived, but the ship was clearly beyond repair. Smoke filled the air, and the acrid smell of burning circuits made him cough. "Everyone out," Havoc ordered, already moving toward the emergency hatch. "This vessel is not stable." They evacuated into the forest, carrying what emergency equipment they could salvage. The ship had carved a long scar through the trees before coming to rest in a small clearing. Trell looked at the wreckage and felt his chest tighten with worry. Their communication systems were destroyed. Their shelter equipment had been in the cargo bay that now lay crushed beneath twisted metal. PRYN activated her portable scanner. "I am detecting no immediate threats in the surrounding area. The atmosphere is breathable, but the temperature will drop significantly after sunset." Trell checked his chronometer. 6 hours until dark. His species, the Corvians, required stable temperatures to survive. They had evolved on a world with minimal seasonal variation, and their bodies could not regulate heat efficiently. Without proper shelter, the night cold would kill them. "We need to begin emergency shelter construction immediately," Quinn said, spreading out the salvaged equipment. "I estimate we have enough material for a basic structure, but assembly will require careful planning." Havoc nodded. "I will establish a perimeter and scout for resources. PRYN begin the site assessment." They fell into their trained emergency protocols. First, catalog all available resources. Second, assess environmental factors. Third, calculate structural requirements. Fourth, design the shelter. Fifth, gather materials. The process was methodical and thorough, exactly as Corvian efficiency demanded. Trell began working through the calculations for shelter size based on their body dimensions and temperature needs. He was on step 3 when Havoc returned from his perimeter check. "Ambassador, there's a human approaching from the west." Trell felt his pulse quicken. First contact was happening now, under the worst possible circumstances. He straightened his uniform and prepared his greeting as a figure emerged from the trees. The human was tall, wearing simple work clothes and carrying what appeared to be a primitive cutting tool over one shoulder. He stopped at the edge of their crash site and surveyed the damage with calm eyes. "Heard the crash from my place," the human said. "Everyone okay?" Trell stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Trell of the Corvian Federation. We are uninjured, but our vessel is destroyed. We require assistance with emergency shelter construction. Our biology cannot tolerate the temperature decrease that will occur after sunset. We need a structure approximately 4 meters by 4 meters, elevated from the ground for thermal efficiency, with proper insulation and wind protection." The human listened, asked a few questions about their temperature tolerance, then said something that made no sense. "I can fix this before dark. Just need to run home for my tools." Trell blinked. "I do not understand. There is no shelter here to fix. We require new construction, and our assessment indicates this will require careful planning and, building from scratch," the human interrupted. "That's what I meant. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He jogged off into the trees before Trell could explain that building a proper shelter required days of work with specialized equipment. The human clearly did not understand the complexity of their situation. Perhaps he meant to bring communication equipment to contact proper authorities. PRYNN approached with her scanner. I have completed the environmental assessment. Ground moisture content is acceptable for foundation placement. Wind patterns suggest optimal orientation for the structure would be northeast to southwest alignment. Good, Trell said. Quinn, what is your analysis of material requirements? Insufficient, Quinn replied, examining their salvage supplies. We have emergency thermal blankets and structural supports for a standard evacuation shelter, but those require 6 hours of assembly time according to the manual. And our tools were damaged in the crash. Havok frowned. Can we reduce assembly time? Not without compromising structural integrity, Quinn said. Corvian safety protocols exist for good reason. Trell nodded. They would follow proper procedures, even in an emergency. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in shelter construction could be fatal. They had 6 hours. It would be close, but if they worked efficiently and followed the standard protocols, they could have basic shelter before the temperature dropped to dangerous levels. He heard an engine sound and turned to see the human returning in a primitive wheeled vehicle loaded with materials and equipment. The human began unloading items with quick, practiced movements. Let us continue our assessment, Trell said to his team. They needed to select the optimal location, calculate load distributions, and plan the construction sequence. They gathered around Parwin's scanner display to review the topographical data. Behind them, the human walked through their crash site with his eyes moving rapidly across the terrain. He stopped near 4 large trees arranged roughly in a square pattern. This'll work perfect, the human said, though no one was listening. Trell was focused on the scanner, working through the mathematical models for shelter placement. They were making good progress on the planning phase. With luck, they might even complete their calculations in less than 2 hours. Owen Reeves dragged his toolbox from the truck bed and surveyed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had solved problems like this 100 times before. For aliens, 1 crash ship, 6 hours until dark, and temperature requirements that meant they needed real shelter, not just a tarp and some hope. He had built tree houses for his kids, hunting blinds for friends, and emergency shelters after storms. This was just another day of putting wood together in the right order. The aliens were huddled around some kind of glowing device, talking in low voices and gesturing at the air. Planning, probably. Owen had worked with enough engineers to recognize that particular brand of overthinking. They would still be planning when the sun went down if someone did not just start building. That he pulled out his circular saw and set on a makeshift work table made from 2 sawhorses. The lumber he brought was standard framing material, nothing fancy, but it would do the job. He had 12-foot 2x6s for the main supports, 2x4s for the frame, and plywood for the floor and walls. Add some insulation, a tarp for the roof, and his portable heater, and these folks would sleep warm tonight. Owen began measuring and marking cut lines. He had built enough structures to know the dimensions by instinct. 4 meters by 4 meters, the alien had said. That translated to about 13 feet square. Add a little extra for structural overlap, and he needed a 14-foot platform. He marked the boards and started cutting. The saw screamed through the wood, throwing sawdust into the afternoon air. One of the aliens, the tall one with the security posture, walked over and watched with obvious concern. Is that device safe? Havok asked, eyeing the spinning blade. Safe enough if you know what you're doing, Owen said, finishing a cut and moving to the next board. Done this about 10,000 times. Haven't lost a finger yet. There are no safety shields or automatic shutoff mechanisms. Nope, just me paying attention. Owen made another cut, checked the length, and nodded in satisfaction. You folks want to help? I could use someone to hold board steady while I cut. Makes it faster. Havok looked uncertain, but positioned himself where Owen indicated. The next few cuts went smoother with an extra pair of hands, even if those hands were clearly nervous about the whole process. Owen worked through his lumber pile, cutting support beams to length, notching joints, and preparing everything he would need for the frame. The female alien, the one who had been doing scanner readings, approached with her device held out. I am PRYNN. May I ask what structural calculations you are using for load distribution? Mostly just experience, Owen said, setting up his drill. 4 corner posts between the trees, floor joists every 16 inches, double beams for the supports. Standard construction. But how do you know the stress tolerances without computational analysis? Owen paused to look at her. What's been holding up buildings for thousands of years? You build it right, it holds. You build it wrong, it falls down. I learned what right looks like. PRYNN seemed unsatisfied with this answer, but retreated to consult with her companions. Owen returned to work. He had corner posts to set, and the best light for working was right now. Not after another 20 minutes of discussion, he hauled the first beam over to the trees and began securing it with heavy lag bolts drilled directly into the tree trunk. The tree was a mature oak, solid and strong. It would not even notice the weight of the platform. He climbed up using his ladder, positioned the beam at 8 feet high, and drove the bolts home with his impact driver. The second alien, the engineer, hurried over. You are anchoring directly to living wood without reinforcement plates. Tree won't mind, Owen said, moving to the second tree. Done this dozens of times. Never had a tree fail. But the biological stress on the organism, lady, this tree has branches thicker than my leg hanging off at 40 feet up. My little platform isn't going to hurt it. He finished securing the second corner post and climbed down to move his ladder. 2 corners down, 2 to go. Quinn followed him with her scanner, taking readings of the bolts and beams. The structural integrity appears sound, she admitted. But this violates 17 different Corvian construction protocols. Good thing we're not on Corvia then. Owen hauled up the third beam. The work was going fast. He had done this so many times that his hands knew the movements without his brain needing to direct them. Measure by eye, position the beam level, drill the pilot holes, drive the bolts. Move to the next corner. Repeat. With all 4 corners secured, Owen began installing the floor joists. These connected the corner beams and would support the platform where the aliens would sleep. He worked his way around the square, spacing the joists precisely and securing them with metal hangers and screws. The aliens had gone back to their planning session, occasionally glancing over at his progress. The tall alien, the one who had introduced himself as ambassador, walked over as Owen was laying down the plywood flooring. How are you working so quickly without detailed plans? Owen straightened up and wiped sweat from his forehead. Got the plans up here, he said, tapping his temple. Built my first treehouse when I was 12. Built about 20 more since then. Your requirements are pretty simple compared to the one I did last summer with the rope bridge and the slide. But surely you need precise measurements, structural analysis, safety verification. Already did all that. Just did it fast. Owen drove another screw through the plywood into the joist below. Look, I know this seems quick to you folks, but I promise you'll have a warm place to sleep tonight. That's what matters, right? Trell watched the human work for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, that is what matters. Owen finished securing the floor and stood up on the platform to test its stability. Solid as bedrock. All right, floor is done. Now for the walls. He checked his watch. 4 hours until sunset. Right on schedule. The walls went up in sections. Owen had pre-cut the framing based on the measurements he had calculated in his head during the drive over. Each wall was a rectangle of 2x4s connected with corner brackets and screws, designed to slot into place on the platform and bolt together at the corners. He lifted the first wall section into position and secured it to the floor joists. Quinn could not stop herself from scanning every joint and connection. Her engineering training demanded verification, even as the evidence before her eyes showed that Owen's methods produced results. The scanner showed proper load distribution, secure fastening, and structural soundness. He was building a functional shelter using nothing but hand tools and intuition. It should not be possible, yet here it was happening. The second wall is warped, Quinn called out, examining a section of framing that had a visible bend in one of the boards. Owen glanced over. Yeah, lumber does that sometimes. Not a problem, but the structural integrity, watch. Owen grabbed some thin wooden shims from his toolbox and positioned them behind the warped board. He drove screws through the frame at strategic points, pulling the warped wood into alignment. When he finished, the wall was straight and true. You work with the materials you have. Perfect lumber is expensive, and sometimes you just don't have it. So you adapt. The concept seemed to trouble Quinn. Corvian construction used manufactured materials with precise specifications. The idea of working with flawed components and compensating for their defects was foreign to her training. Yet Owen made it look routine, almost boring. Havek had taken over the job of organizing Owen's tools, tried to arrange them in logical categories. He placed all the cutting tools together, all the measuring tools together, all the fastening tools together. It was the obvious system, but every time Owen needed something, he would spend several seconds searching for it. Sorry, but this isn't really helping, Owen said finally. I need things in the order I use them, not grouped by type. When I'm in the middle of a job, I just reach for what's next. I will hold boards then, Havek offered, feeling somewhat useless. That would be great, actually. Owen positioned him at the edge of a wall section. Just keep this steady while I secure the other end. They fell into a rhythm. Owen would position a piece, Havek would hold it steady, Owen would drill and screw, then they would move to the next piece. It was not elegant or sophisticated, but it was effective. The walls grew higher with each passing minute. PRYNN attempted to help by carrying materials from the truck to the work area. She quickly learned that Owen had packed the truck in a specific order, with items he needed first on top and items for later buried underneath. Her efforts to organize things more efficiently just meant Owen spent time digging through rearranged piles. Maybe just hand me things when I ask, Owen suggested gently. I kind of have a system. Your system appears to be chaos, PRYNN said, but she stopped reorganizing. Chaos with results, Owen replied, hoisting another wall section into place 0.3 hours before sunset. All 4 walls stood vertical and connected. Owen added a second layer of plywood, sheathing to the exterior, creating a solid barrier against wind. The structure now looked like an actual building, elevated among the trees, with walls that blocked sight and weather. Trell watched the transformation with growing amazement. They had spent the first hour after the crash just assessing the situation and cataloging resources. Owen had spent that same hour building an entire floor platform. While they debated optimal placement and structural requirements, Owen had erected 4 walls. The human worked like a machine, except machines did not adapt and problem solve the way he did. I do not understand how you maintain this pace, Trell said, approaching as Owen began work on the doorframe. Do humans not require rest intervals? Our safety protocols mandate a 10-minute break every hour during physical labor. Owen paused to drink water from his thermos. I'll rest when it's done. You folks need shelter before dark, and I said I'd get it done, so I'm getting it done. He set down the thermos and went back to work, cutting the opening for the door and installing a pre-hung door unit he had brought from his workshop. The door swung open and closed smoothly, latching with a simple but effective mechanism. Owen added weather stripping around the edges to seal against drafts. Every detail received attention, even as he worked at a speed that seemed reckless to the Corvians. Havek asked the question that had been bothering him. Are all humans capable of this? Building stuff? Sure, lots of people can. My dad taught me when I was a kid. Most folks around here know basic construction. It's just useful, you know? Things break, you need to fix them. Or build them. Owen measured the window openings and began cutting panels from clear plastic sheeting. These windows aren't fancy, but they'll let in light and keep out cold. On our world, construction is performed by specialized teams with years of training, Havek said. Probably do fancier work than me, Owen admitted, installing the first window panel. This is just practical building. It'll last a few years if you maintain it, probably fall apart after a decade. But for getting you through tonight and the next few days, it'll work fine. The roof framing went up next, angled to shed rain. Owen moved around the structure with confidence, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Each piece fit into place like he had built this exact structure 100 times before. In a sense, he had. The specific dimensions changed, but the fundamental process remained the same. He covered the roof frame with plywood and then stretched a heavy tarp over the top, securing it with screws and washers. Not pretty, but waterproof. Through the open door, the interior of the shelter was visible now, an enclosed space that would hold heat and protect its occupants from the elements. Owen climbed down from the roof and stepped back to examine his work. Getting there. Now for insulation and heat. Owen hauled rolls of reflective insulation up the ladder and into the shelter. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees now, warning of approaching evening. 2 hours left, maybe less. He had time, but not much to spare. Inside the shelter, he began stapling the insulation to the interior walls. The reflective material would trap heat and prevent drafts. It was not the highest quality insulation available, but for short-term use, it would keep the Corvians comfortable. He worked his way around the perimeter, stapling every few inches to ensure no gaps. PRYN climbed into the shelter behind him and watched the process. This material reflects thermal radiation. Yep, keeps heat in during winter, keeps heat out during summer. Simple but effective. Owen finished one wall and moved to the next. You folks said you needed to stay around 65 degrees Fahrenheit in here. Approximately 18 degrees Celsius. Yes, our bodies do not regulate temperature efficiently. Electric heater should handle that easy. I brought one that'll keep a space this size warm all night. Owen pointed to the battery generator he had set near the door. That'll power the heater and the lights. Should last 48 hours before needing a recharge. Quinn examined the generator with her scanner. This is a chemical battery system. Quite inefficient compared to our plasma cells. But it works, and it's here, and your plasma cells are probably crushed in that ship. Owen did not say it meanly, just factually. Sometimes the best technology is the one you actually have access to. The insulation complete, Owen began installing LED strip lights around the ceiling perimeter. He had picked these because they drew minimal power and would not overheat the small space. The lights clicked into mounting brackets he secured to the framing, and when he plugged them into the generator, they filled the shelter with clean white light. We can adjust the brightness if this is too much, Owen said, showing them the simple dial control. The illumination is adequate, Trell said, but his voice carried something more than mere approval. The shelter was becoming real. What had seemed impossible a few hours ago now surrounded them with solid walls and warm light. Owen installed the heater next, positioning it in a corner where it could not be accidentally touched but would distribute heat evenly. He added a simple thermostat and set it to the temperature the Corvians had specified. Within minutes, the shelter's interior began to warm. Havok tested the door seal, opening and closing it several times. The latch mechanism is quite simple. Simple means less stuff to break, Owen said. He was building sleeping platforms now, raised benches along 2 walls that would let the Corvians rest at a comfortable height. They had mentioned preferring an elevated sleeping position, something about circulation in their legs. Owen just built what they needed and did not ask too many questions about alien biology. The sleeping platforms were basic construction, just frames with plywood tops, but he sanded the edges smooth and added a foam pad he had grabbed from his camping supplies. Not fancy mattresses, but better than sleeping on bare wood. PRYN ran her scanner over the platforms. The structural integrity is sound. These will support our weight safely. That's the idea. Owen added hooks to the walls for hanging equipment and small shelves in the corners for storage. Little details that made a space livable rather than just survivable. He had learned long ago that these touches mattered. People needed to feel secure, not just be secure. That he installed battery-powered fans near the ceiling for air circulation, positioned to move air without creating uncomfortable drafts. Then he added ventilation panels near the top of 2 walls, covered with fine mesh that would let air flow but keep insects out. Quinn was reviewing all her scans, correlating the data into a comprehensive analysis. This structure exceeds our minimum requirements for emergency shelter. The thermal insulation is adequate. The structural stability is well above necessary thresholds. The ventilation will prevent carbon dioxide buildup. This is not merely functional, it is well designed. Thanks, Owen said, testing the window latches. You build things right, or you don't build them at all. My dad always said that. Trell stood in the center of the shelter, turning slowly to take in all the details. The human had listened to their requirements and then exceeded them. The sleeping platforms were at the correct height for Corvian comfort. The windows could be sealed against cold, or opened for fresh air. The lighting was bright enough to work by, but not harsh. There was storage space for their equipment. There were even handles near the door for steadying themselves while climbing in and out. You anticipated needs we did not explicitly mention, Trell said quietly. Owen shrugged. Just common sense stuff. You said you needed to stay warm and safe. So I figured you'd want somewhere to put your gear, light to see by, and comfortable sleeping arrangements. It's what anyone would want. But it was not what anyone would think to provide, especially not in an emergency situation with limited time and resources. Owen had not just built a shelter. He had built a home, temporary though it might be. 45 minutes before sunset, Owen did a final walkthrough of the treehouse with all 4 Corvians present. He showed them how to operate the heater controls, how to adjust the lights, how to open the windows for ventilation. He demonstrated the door latch and pointed out the emergency release he had installed on the inside in case the main latch failed. The battery generator should last 2 days easy, Owen said. I'll come back tomorrow morning to check on you. I already called the authorities about your crash, so help should arrive soon. But until then, you'll be warm and dry in here. He left them with extra batteries, his emergency radio tuned to local channels, and a thermos of hot coffee. The caffeine won't hurt your biology. I checked your medical database in your ship computer before I drove over. Figured you might want something warm to drink. The Corvians stood in their new shelter and watched the human pack up his tools. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the sky orange and red. The temperature was already beginning to drop. Owen drove away with a wave, his truck disappearing into the darkening forest. The Corvians stood outside their shelter for a moment, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. Then Havoc suggested they go inside, and they climbed the ladder one by one into the warmth. The heater hummed quietly, maintaining the precise temperature Owen had set. The lights provided steady illumination without flicker or glare. The insulated walls blocked the sound of wind moving through the trees. In less than 5 hours, a single human had created a space that met every one of their survival requirements and several needs they had not thought to articulate. Trell sat on one of the sleeping platforms and felt the fatigue of the day catch up with him. The crash, the panic, the uncertainty, all of it had been manageable because they had followed their training. But this casual miracle of construction had no place in his understanding of how the galaxy worked. We need to discuss what happened today, Trell said. What we witnessed. The others settled into the shelter, finding places to sit or stand. Quinn had her scanner out, reviewing the data she had collected throughout the afternoon. PRYNN was examining the door latch mechanism with careful attention. Havoc simply stood near the window, looking out at the forest that had gone dark while they were not paying attention. One human civilian, Trell continued, with primitive tools and no computational assistance, built a structure that meets Federation emergency shelter standards in less time than our protocols allocate for the planning phase alone. The construction violates numerous safety procedures, Quinn said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yet the final result is structurally sound. I have verified this repeatedly. The stress tolerances are appropriate. The materials are properly fastened. The design accounts for environmental factors. It should not work, but it does. PRYNN added her observations. Owen adapted constantly throughout the construction process. When he encountered warped lumber, he compensated. When we inadvertently disrupted his workflow, he adjusted. He solved problems as they emerged rather than planning for every contingency in advance. His species must have evolved in a highly variable environment, Quinn said, one that rewarded rapid adaptation over careful planning. Havoc turned from the window. I'm concerned about the military implications. If a human civilian possesses these capabilities, what can their trained engineers accomplish? What can their military forces construct? The question hung in the air. The Corvian Federation had encountered 18 space-faring civilizations. All of them followed similar developmental patterns because those patterns reflected universal constraints. Complex tasks required specialized training, institutional support, and careful methodology. Individuals might excel in narrow domains, but remain dependent on larger systems. Humans appeared to violate this pattern. Owen was not a trained engineer or military specialist. He described his skills as common, learned casually from his parent during childhood. If rapid, independent construction was a baseline human capability, then Federation assumptions about human civilization required complete revision. Trell accessed the Earth information networks through his salvage datapad, using the intact receiver in their crashed ship to connect. What he found confirmed his growing concerns and added new dimensions to them. Humans built permanent residences in weeks or months. Emergency response teams deployed complete temporary infrastructure in hours. There were humans who constructed buildings competitively for entertainment. The species had a cultural concept called do-it-yourself that celebrated individual capability in tasks the Federation considered necessarily institutional. "Look at this," Trell said, sharing a video file with the others. It showed humans constructing an entire small house in a single day as part of a charity project. Dozens of humans worked together with practice coordination, framing walls and installing systems with efficiency that matched industrial fabrication. They swarmed the problem, PRYNN observed. Multiple individuals working simultaneously on different aspects, trusting each other to maintain standards without constant verification. Quinn pulled up technical documentation on human construction methods. Their building codes are less stringent than ours in some ways, more stringent in others. They account for human error by overbuilding structural elements. Everything is stronger than minimum requirements because they assume mistakes will happen. A culture that accepts imperfection but compensates for it, Trell said slowly. Rather than eliminating error through rigid protocols, they build in redundancy and adaptability. Havek was reading military assessments now, his security training focusing on threat analysis. Human military engineering capabilities are formidable. They construct field bases in days, repair damaged equipment with improvised methods, and adapt to resource constraints with creative solutions. In military simulations, human forces consistently outperform predicted capabilities because they do not wait for optimal conditions. They act with available resources and improvise success. The implications were staggering. The Federation had approached first contact with humanity, expecting to meet another civilization that would require decades of careful integration into galactic society. They anticipated the standard pattern of technological exchange, cultural adaptation, and diplomatic negotiation that had characterized previous first contacts. But humans did not fit the standard pattern. They were a species of capable individuals who could work independently or collectively, who adapted rapidly to new situations, and who possessed practical skills that most Federation citizens relegated to industrial automation. "There is another aspect we must consider," Trell said. "Owen helped us without hesitation or negotiation. We are alien to him, unknown and potentially dangerous. Yet he immediately committed his afternoon to ensuring our survival. He asked nothing in return." PRYNN nodded. He did not even seem to consider it remarkable. When I expressed gratitude, he appeared confused by the depth of my appreciation. Because to him, it was simply what one does when others need help, Quinn said. His species evolved rapid construction capabilities, but they also evolved the social inclination to use those capabilities for others. Outside the shelter, rain began to fall. The drops pattered against the tarp roof, but nothing leaked through. Owen had sealed the structure properly. The Corvians were dry, warm, and safe while a storm moved through the forest around them. Trell composed a message on his datapad, beginning what would become the most important report of his diplomatic career. The Federation needed to understand what humanity represented. Not just another civilization to trade with, but a fundamentally different kind of people. Morning arrived with Owen returning as promised. He brought breakfast in a simple cooler, explaining he figured they might not have food salvageable from the crash. The meal was basic by human standards, but carefully chosen. He had checked their biological requirements and brought items their digestive systems could process safely. The Corvians had slept well in shelter, warm and comfortable through the night. The rain had continued until dawn, but they had remained dry. The heater had maintained perfect temperature. The structure had not shifted or creaked, standing solid among the trees. 2 hours after Owen's arrival, a Corvian rescue ship appeared in the sky. It descended with careful precision, landing in a clearing a short distance from the crash site. The ship's captain, an experienced officer named Tavik, emerged with a recovery team. Tavik surveyed the crashed diplomatic vessel, assessed the condition of Ambassador Trell's team, and then noticed the structure in the trees. He climbed up to examine it while the recovery team began salvaging equipment from the wreckage. Inside the treehouse, Tavik ran a scanner over the walls, floor, and ceiling. He tested the door, examined the insulation, and checked the heater installation. When he climbed back down, his expression carried surprise. "This meets Federation emergency shelter standards," Tavik said. "Who constructed it?" Owen raised his hand slightly. "That'd be me. You're a human construction specialist. I'm a carpenter. I build houses and decks mostly." Tavik looked at the treehouse again, then at Owen, then back at the treehouse. "How long did construction require?" "About 5 hours, give or take." The captain's translator must have malfunctioned because that answer made no sense. 5 hours for a structure of this quality, built by one individual with primitive tools, was not possible. Yet the evidence stood among the trees, and the 4 survivors had clearly spent the night in comfort and safety. The Corvians packed their salvaged equipment and prepared to board the rescue ship. Owen helped them carry items, making sure they had not left anything behind. PRYNN tried to pay him for his work, but he waved off the offer. "You folks just crashed. You don't owe me anything. Glad I could help." Trell stood before Owen and performed a formal Corvian gesture of gratitude, a slight bow with his hands pressed together. "You saved our lives. The temperature last night would have been lethal for us without shelter. Like I said, glad I could help. You need anything else before you go?" They did not. Trell shook Owen's hand in the human custom, trying to convey through the gesture what words seemed insufficient to express. Then the Corvians boarded their rescue ship and departed, leaving Owen standing beside his truck in the forest. The treehouse remained behind, a monument to human capability that its builder had already forgotten about. Owen had another project starting that afternoon, a deck repair job for a neighbor. The aliens were safe now, so his work was done. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Trell submitted his first contact report to the Corvian Federation Council. The document ran to 87 pages and included detailed technical assessments, cultural analysis, and strategic recommendations. It became required reading for all Federation diplomats preparing for human contact. The core of Trell's report challenged fundamental assumptions about technological civilization. The Federation had always believed that advancement required increasing specialization, that complex tasks demanded institutional support, and that capabilities scaled with formal training and computational assistance. Humans demonstrated an alternative path. They maintained high individual capability across broad domains. Their citizens routinely performed tasks that other species relegated to trained specialists. They valued practical skills and passed them casually from generation to generation through informal family teaching. More significantly, humans coupled capability with immediate willingness to help. Owen had not hesitated or negotiated. He had not formed committees or filed reports. He had simply identified a problem and fixed it because that was what needed doing. Trell argued that this combination, practical capability plus social cooperation, made humanity uniquely valuable as a galactic partner. Human adaptability would complement Corvian thoroughness. Human rapid response would balance Corvian careful planning. The species could learn from each other. The Federation Council debated the report for weeks. Some members urged caution, concerned about potential threats from such an adaptable species. Others pushed for immediate deep cooperation, excited by the possibilities. Eventually, consensus emerged around measured engagement with substantial cultural exchange programs. Trade negotiations expanded. Defense postures were reconsidered not as protection against humans, but as potential cooperation with them. Scientific partnerships were proposed. The Federation began learning to work with a species that operated on different principles but achieved comparable results through different methods than on Earth. Owen finished his deck repair and started kitchen renovation. His daughter helped him with the demolition work, learning how to use a pry bar properly and safely. She was 11 now, already competent with basic tools, already developing the skills her father possessed. They worked together in comfortable silence most of the time, Owen explaining things when teaching moments arose, but mostly just letting her learn through doing. This was how his father had taught him, and his grandfather before that. Generation after generation of humans passing along practical knowledge through simple demonstration and practice. When they stopped for lunch, his daughter asked about the aliens he had helped. Owen had mentioned the incident briefly, but without much detail. He did not think it was particularly interesting. "Are they okay?" she asked. "Yeah. Their people picked them up the next morning. They're fine. Did you get to keep the treehouse?" Owen smiled. "I guess it's still out there in the woods. Might go check on it someday, see if it's holding up. Can we build a treehouse in our yard?" "Sure. Maybe next weekend, if the weather's good." She grinned and went back to her sandwich. Just another project, just another thing to build. That was the human way. There was always something that needed making, always someone who might need help, and always the capability to do something about it before sunset. The galaxy was learning what that meant. The Corvian Federation had encountered a species of builders who measured wealth not in what they constructed for themselves, but in what they could create for others when it mattered most. And sometimes, what mattered most was a simple shelter built with care in the fading light of an autumn afternoon.